The 2023 NFL season is in the books. Let's talk about lessons learned from the Super Bowl teams as we catch up on the Bengals' newest offensive staff changes.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We are the Locked On Bengals podcast, covering your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. You can make sure you don't miss an episode. Become an everydayer by hitting that subscribe button. That also helps support us wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube or any audio platform. Today, we're going to dive into a couple more Bengals coaching staff changes on the offensive side of the ball, and we're going to talk Super Bowl lessons learned as we put the 2023 season firmly in the rearview mirror and shift into draft season and free agent season.
Yeah, baby.
Full on off-season season, as it were. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals brought to you by FanDuel. You'll get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's 150 bonus bucks if your bet wins. Check it out at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And James, today we will start with Jordan Salkin. The Bengals have a new offensive coach. He will be an offensive assistant of some sort. I think his entire title is likely to be offensive assistant, and his specific duties are not at this time known, but we do know where he comes from, and that is Oregon, where Bo Nix is all of a sudden a potential first-round pick at quarterback after being kind of a joke of an NFL prospect for most of his college career. James, what do you make of this hire for the Bengals as an offensive assistant?
Yeah, it's interesting. First things first. Hey, what do you think of Jackson Powers Johnson? Do you think he's going to be an elite interior lineman in this league? Bo Nix, Bo Schmicks, because the Bengals aren't in on that. Oh, actually, I would ask him this. Do you think Bo Nix is going to be a top 17 pick?
Yeah.
Could he go top 17, please? And thank you. All right. Anyways, no, I think it's an interesting hire where you're like, oh, another outside mind. And I think that can help appease those that are wanting outside perspective. But I don't think that this is some game-changing thing that's going to completely change the Bengals' offensive scheme or anything like that, or any huge big takeaway that some could have because of where he comes from. And I think the Oregon tie, especially, and you look back, the Miami Dolphins tie, you're like, oh, offense, and I still think people view both programs that way. Obviously, the Dolphins for good reason, but Oregon. You instantly think of Chip Kelly, and then you look at what Bo Nix was able to do, and you think of that offense. And I think it's cool. You get a nice, talented young coach in town, but I'm not sure how much of an impact we're going to know that it has or doesn't have. It very well could, and I'm sure Zach Taylor, like he always does with his coaches, will give credit where credit's due. Say if the Bengals are alive 360 or so days from now. But no, I don't anticipate it being some groundbreaking, earth-changing thing for this offense. Not that you're saying that. I think some will see the Oregon tie and jump to, oh, what could this mean for the offense?
You mentioned Chip Kelly?
Yeah, the Oregon tie from way back.
Oh, way back. There. Okay.
Yeah. But I still think people view Oregon and think they're on. And think how good those offenses have been and innovative and stuff. And they have, for sure.
They have two potential first-round players on that offense this year, and a wide receiver and a quarterback. So I think it was a pretty good offense.
Three.
Three. Jackson Powers Johnson, of course, the guy you just mentioned.
The one that might be here, my man.
Yeah. Obviously has an interesting history, and there is a similarity between the two coaches that have just been hired by the Cincinnati Bengals for these assistant or passing game coordinator roles. Justin Riscotti played quarterback at James Madison University in 2005. Jordan Salkin got his coaching start at James Madison in 2014. Salkin didn't play college football. There's a great article that Ben Baby and myself both linked on Twitter from the Times Herald record that chronicles Salkin's journey to become a Division I coach. He started by sending 1,500 emails when he was graduating from West Virginia University, looking for internships, looking for any opportunity to coach football. He was a little undersized. He was 5'9". He played quarterback in high school. Obviously, tough to translate that to any level above high school. As a Princeton High School alum, James, I saw Mr. Football, Mr. Ohio for football, Mr. Football for Ohio. When I was back in high school, Mike Daniels couldn't get a quarterback position in the NFL. He had to change positions and bounce around a bunch at the University of Cincinnati. But when you have undersized quarterbacks, can't tend to play football at a higher level. But he knew he wanted to coach from his high school days. He knew he wanted to be involved in football. He knew he wanted to coach. He went and got his education in football in sports management, and immediately tried to get into coaching. That started at James Madison University. And then the coaches that he worked with there, he followed to Rutgers and then Texas before getting his break and going from quality control coach to an actual position coach, where he started working with quarterbacks in New Mexico in 2020, and then was with the Dolphins for a couple of years before landing in Oregon. I think a lot of those years were focused on working with quarterbacks. In Texas, he was certainly working with quarterbacks for a couple of years when he was an offensive quality control coach. Was a quarterbacks coach, obviously, in New Mexico in 2020. And I think with Miami was doing some work with quarterbacks as well. So a guy who's passionate about football, obviously, was very driven, worked for free when he got in to football coaching, and has worked his way up into a big opportunity to get in with a very talented coaching pipeline in Cincinnati. And like I said, did a great job with Bo Nix in whatever role he had in the quarterback's room in Oregon most recently. And also, as you mentioned, James, provide some insight on a couple of Oregon players, three Oregon players who could be potential first-round picks.
No doubt. And I think that helps a ton. I also think getting to everyone's point, getting another set of eyes on the quarterback room and having a young, hungry, clearly motivated coach, it helps. I don't want to downplay that. I probably did downplay it too much at the beginning of the podcast. I do think it's important to continue the pipeline that has been built, because I think the Bengals have built a high-end coaching staff. And so to get another quarterback expert in that room and on the offensive side, I do think that that's important, because it is a passing league. And if the Bengals are going to win the Super Bowl next year in New Orleans, like Cam Taylor-Britt, who he tweeted the logo, the Saints logo. I get it. I understand it. And you know what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to pass the ball at a high level with the game on the line. And adding to that room is certainly exciting. And we also know about the assistant quarterbacks coach, Jake, which is something that I don't think anyone, at least as of the time of recording, has reported anywhere. And I'm not sure if you know who pointed it out on social media, but Fredi Knighten, who was an offensive assistant for the Bengals last year, is now listed as the assistant quarterbacks coach. And it's his third year, actually. He's been an offensive assistant the past 2 seasons. But yeah, Bengals quarterbacks assistant coach now. So he moves up behind Brad Cragthorpe. So there we go. They filled that role as well.
That's 9 offensive staff members now on the coaching staff. That's one up from last season. That was actually pointed out by Matt at Mr. K Cincy, who sometimes sends in mailbag questions as well. So shout out to Matt for being the first person that I saw that made this observation. Just refreshing that Bengals.com/team/coaches-roster to see when those changes were dropping. Maybe looking for some information.
We got to do that more.
Perhaps looking for some information as the Bengals hired Jordan Salkin to the staff, but finding a change at assistant quarterbacks coach, Fredi Knighten, getting a little bit of a promotion, going from offensive assistant to helping with a specific room, probably small change of duties for him, and a potential pathway for the future if things go well for Salkin, starting as an offensive assistant in Cincinnati. Those are the coaching updates that we've got. That's probably it on the offensive side of the ball. Wouldn't be surprised to see one more guy join on the defensive side of the ball, where currently they are down one coach compared to last year, but maybe they're comfortable with that as well. But if we do have a defensive coaching staff change, of course, we'll get to talk about that. But with all that said, let's talk about lessons learned from this year's Super Bowl teams, James. We'll talk about our lessons from the big game coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by DoorDash. And like Jake said, we're going to talk about the big game. Hopefully you listened to us when it came to DoorDash. I DoorDashed City Bird over the weekend. And again, best spicy chicken sandwich you could ever ask for, imagine, think about. They have awesome tenders as well. But the point is, with DoorDash, you can have City Bird delivered right to your door. You can have the snacks that you're craving delivered right to your door. Whatever restaurant, from Skyline to anything else, from pizza, groceries, anything in between. Heck, flowers and gifts. It's Valentine's Day this week. You need to get her something for Valentine's Day, by the way. You have to do it. It's a need. Sorry, just part of the gig. And DoorDash, and if you're that busy. And I could think of a million reasons daily to order DoorDash, including City Bird, like I mention all the time. So get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, or a consolation prize for your sad friends, well, all across the city, with Joe Burrow continuing to recover from that wrist injury. And I don't know, I'm sad when Steph Curry loses. So there you go. DoorDash, your door to more. Head to the DoorDash app to get everything you need delivered. Again, DoorDash and the DoorDash app to get everything you need delivered to you.
James, let's talk about the most obvious lesson from the Super Bowl, which is 1, don't fumble, but 2, if you fumble, get luckier. That's it, right? That's the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Fumble luck. That's the entire Super Bowl. Nothing else.
Fumble luck matters. Don't let the ball hit you in the foot, even though you can't see the ball and you have no idea. So there you go.
The punt returner was yelling. He was given the whatever they call it, poison,
sure,
or whatever.
But he had no clue. He couldn't hear him for whatever, and so there's luck involved with this, as there is in every Super Bowl. There's certain calls that everyone will focus on, and there's moments. I think my takeaway throughout the game from really that fumble from Christian McCaffrey on the first possession was, man, the Niners are really outplaying the Chiefs to only be up by, well, nothing. It was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter, but to only be up by 3, to only be up by 10, to only be up by 7. I mean, they were dominating large chunks of that game, and it was a one-possession game for most of it. And that's got to make you uneasy anytime Patrick Mahomes is on the other side.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat, and I wish I could credit the person who tweeted it. I think it was an ESPN analytics guy, but the stat is from Next Gen Stats. And it was that San Francisco lost something like 35 to 36% of win probability in that game on 3 plays. The Christian McCaffrey fumble, the punt turnover where Ray McLeod trying to make a heads up play that everyone initially said, you're being an idiot. Why are you trying to touch the ball? Because it hit the guy's foot, like you mentioned. The 49ers can't recover that punt turnover, and the missed extra point, which I don't necessarily count that one personally, but Next Gen Stats did. Those 3 plays amount to a 36% swing in win probability. And I didn't tweet much during the game, James. I was talking to you about this before we started the show. But what I did say numerous times was, man, that fumble on the first drive is brutal. Steve Spagnuolo is going to get much harder to play against as the game goes on. It's the way that his defenses work in the playoffs, a lot of times it's harder to play against him once he knows what you're trying to do in the game and he's able to adjust. He's great at in-game adjustments. And when your best player on offense gives the ball away on a scripted drive, which is where one of the places Kyle Shanahan is the strongest, when you're in scoring territory already, that is just brutal. And it was a huge difference in the game, not to mention directly then giving the Chiefs 3 and what turned out to be 7 points on the fumble, on the punt. Massive plays in the game. And there are definitely a lot of other lessons to talk about in terms of roster construction and how the game went. But man, were those just massive plays. When your best players, and on the very next drive, Trent Williams had 2 penalties. When your best players are killing you, that's so hard to overcome.
It is. And yet they were in position to. and they were able to put themselves in position to essentially end the game at the end of the fourth quarter. All you have to do is get a first down. Couldn't do it. And then you're faced with a third down in overtime. You want to get into the end zone. Couldn't do it. So,
and you don't know the overtime rules. What are we doing?
Well, that's insane.
Come on.
I will say this, like, especially, and it's not just the Super Bowl, but watching Dan Campbell, watching some of these coaches, and I know Zach and the staff, they've made mistakes, but my God, like a lot of these mistakes and like awful penalties that are just knucklehead style penalties, like outside of the Vernon Hargraves one, which was ridiculously stupid. There weren't many during that run that I remember that were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened. So just something to point out there too. Also, I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but I'm going to bring it up. Before the game, the Logan Wilson play was showed, or I saw it on social media, and I watched it, and it was like the broadcast. And at the time, both Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth, they didn't see anything. They didn't see anything on it. So I know you always see that slow-mo of like a little tug, or not even slow-mo, but like the picture where it looks like Logan's really grabbing him. Nah. No. Anyway.
The officials in this game did mostly swallow their whistles. Were
They did.
there officiating? I mean, probably to their detriment. I did see a play shared this morning on a key play for Kansas City where Fred Warner gets tackled trying to blitz, like he wins and just gets tackled running by an offensive lineman. So, when
Nick Bosa
refs
got held on a key one from Donovan Smith, it was a 3rd and 10. I think it was the one to Kelsey over the middle, and he just got great. It was textbook holding, but that happens. It does happen.
And when the refs swallow their whistles on the other side, like that's kind of what happens. You don't notice it as much because they're not directly changing the game by making calls, but they're doing it. Either way, that's not really one of our lessons learned. Although I do think that one in the Super Bowl and the Bengals game a couple of years ago, a great example of this until it wasn't, I guess. Well, they were letting him play. They were only calling the most egregious stuff until the Logan Wilson call, which was
there were two penalties on each side when that call was made.
Yeah.
And part of why everything's so fresh in my mind, I listened to Dan Horde on the Bengals Booth podcast, and he went back and kind of took it down memory lane. And it was such a blur then. It was actually good for me. It was refreshing to just kind of go back and rehash some of it. But yeah, the one thing that stands out, and again, this was unplanned, but I guess I'm taking us here. And he pointed this out. Him and Lapp apparently did on the radio broadcast. I wasn't listening, but they did. He played the clip on the pod. Jermaine Pratt made a play the down before the holding call on Logan Wilson. Sean McVay was going off saying that Pratt held. And so you wonder if that was in the back of the officials' minds when they make that call, which was obviously a game-altering call.
Which is why coaches work the refs the entire game. That's why Zach loses his mind for 10 seconds after plays before he gets back into his head coaching job, as has been described, where he flips a switch and gets back to it. But it's why you see coaches losing their minds and working the refs. Basketball, football, these are human elements that unfortunately exist. But we've hardly talked about the rosters and how these teams got to the game. But some very interesting notes from that football game that kind of underscores the coin flippy nature, I think, that sometimes exists in Super Bowls, where it really can come down to the way the ball bounces, the way the punt glances off the leg of a guy trying to block. These little things that are largely chance. The Chiefs fumbling 5 times, losing 1. The 49ers losing both of their fumbles. So things like that, I think, are noteworthy. When you have single game elimination, luck does matter. Can't really control it much, but obviously the 49ers could have done some things differently, and the Chiefs did some things right to put themselves in position to capitalize on that luck. So we'll continue talking Super Bowl takeaways to finish up the show coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So throw $5 on LeBron James if you think the Lakers are going to make a run, or if you think my guy Steph Curry. Look, 2 Steph Curry mentions in one show. Jake, what is going on? Well, it's basketball season, and FanDuel is here for you. Plus, yeah, they'll have odds. You can look ahead to Super Bowl 59 odds, which the Bengals near the top have some of the better odds, I would say, in the league. 6th best last time I checked FanDuel. So get to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. From quick bets, exclusive props, or futures bets in the NFL. They have all of that and so much more at FanDuel. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel is the official partner of the NBA.
A couple of thoughts that I have about the way these teams are put together, James. I want to start with the most pertinent to the Bengals, I think, as they face a big offseason where there's a lot of decisions to be made at a lot of different positions, is you look at the way the Chiefs are put together, and the Chiefs had holes. You're going to have holes when you have a quarterback, when that cap hit kicks. And Patrick Mahomes' cap hit kicked in. Joe Burrow starts to next year, but really they have another year. They have one more season before the real big cap hits hit for Joe Burrow. But when you have that, I've talked about this on the podcast. We've talked about this on the podcast before. I tweeted about it a few weeks ago. I feel like it might be time to at least think about changing your approach to getting at least, solid players across the board, where there's this idea that you're spreading mid-level money around to a bunch of different guys. The Ted Karras contract, the Alex Kappa contract, the BJ Hill contract, the Sam Hubbard contract, the Joe Mixon contract. The list goes on and on, right? They have like 8 guys or so who are roughly average, maybe really important locker room guys. Taking that out of it, just from like a football production perspective, they're paying a lot of money for guys that are right around league average in terms of production, in terms of skill. You look at the Chiefs, on the other hand, they've got a lot of young, cheap production and draft picks, which speaks to hit on draft picks, something the Bengals need to do better. And they've got money tied up in a superstar who didn't play at his position in Joe Thuney. They've got money for Patrick Mahomes. They've got money for Travis Kelce, for Chris Jones. They paid Justin Reed.
Yep.
Justin Reed, a little bit of money on the defensive side of the ball. But the point is the Chiefs are concentrating their payments in superstars and getting young, cheap contributions elsewhere. And it's just kind of this opposite approach to the Bengals, where the Bengals are paying a lot of guys to be kind of average level, and that kind of raises their floor a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chiefs have the quarterback, and you think that the Bengals have the quarterback in Joe Burrow too, that you put a couple pieces around there, and you got to find the impact players, the Chris Joneses of the world. And you got to hit on the draft picks or Trent McDuffie's of your team and find impact that way. So it just goes back to that conversation we had about paying average players versus paying top-end talent, and the need for the Bengals to find more of that top-end talent.
Sure. I think one of the things that stands out about the Chiefs to me is you look at all these drafts and at least 1 to 2 guys have instant, like high-end impact right away. Rashee Rice this past year, he's their best receiver, by far their best receiver. Trent McDuffie last year, where they get him 21st overall. And okay, Sky Moore doesn't necessarily work out in round 2. That's fine. You have an awesome corner. George Karlaftis is contributing and a big part of what they've done. Oh, Isaiah Pacheco in round 7. And I know he didn't play great in the Super Bowl. They don't make the Super Bowl without Isaiah Pacheco. He was a big part of what they were doing and what they built. And then the 2021 draft, the Bengals are in position to have one of the greatest drafts of all time, and they could have. I mean, the Chiefs landed 2 guys that the Bengals had multiple chances at, Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. Not multiple chances at Humphrey, but they had, well, technically if you count the trade back. But point is, key guys in key building blocks, studs. And so, yeah, you're right. Chris Jones, big factor. But I didn't just mention Chris Jones. I mentioned a bunch of guys that are coming in and making an impact. And they the Bengals, Alex Kappa is going to be on the roster, right?
Mhm.
And he's going to be the starting right tackle this year.
Right
So
guard.
where else can they find, or right guard? Yeah, this year, not right tackle. Oh Lord. But do they splurge, to your point? Do they splurge at defensive tackle? Is that the area that they look at? The Chiefs have spent a lot of money in the offensive line room over the past couple of years. Do the Bengals continue to go that route at right tackle with a middle of the pack type of player? I think that's probably their best bet. So it's tough. It's a balance. That doesn't mean they can't draft one at 18, but I think paying Jermaine Illuminor might make more sense than paying Jonah Williams.
It also doesn't mean the Chiefs have been perfect. We talked about a lot of things they've hit on, and a lot of the players they have, but they didn't get much out of Felix Anudike-Uzomah this year, their first round pick. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a first round pick for them back in 2020. They haven't gotten much out of his career. I know he's dealt with
Future
injuries.
Bengal.
Sure. Sky Moore, you mentioned, was not a very impactful player for them. They traded for Kadarius Toney, and he was more detrimental than he was a positive for the Chiefs. They lost their big
This
free
year.
agent.
Last
Joe
year
Thuney.
he was huge for them.
Sure.
But
But
yes.
the receivers this year are a topic of hot criticism. Like, they need to get better at receiver. I know Rashee Rice is a positive building block, their second round pick, and Valdez-Scantling continues to make plays in the playoffs, but they need help at receiver. And that's going to continue to be a topic for the Chiefs into this offseason. But the point is like, you look around commentary around the Chiefs this year, it's like, man, this is probably the worst the Chiefs have been since Patrick Mahomes arrived, and they've won the Super Bowl anyway.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that is, hitting on some of the draft picks we talked about. L'Jarius Sneed, another one, a fourth round pick, who's one of the better corners in the NFL at this point. Having the coaching staff in place, with Steve Spagnuolo being a great defensive coach, and obviously Andy Reid there. So if you think you have the coaching staff, you think you have the quarterback, you can put these studs like Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, a couple of pieces in the draft around him, then you can do it. But you got to hit in the draft. You got to be able to develop your mid-round players, your third to fifth round players, and find some good contributors there. You can't be afraid of going BPA. And I think that's something the Chiefs have done well, is not really picking for need, not being swayed too much by team need, and doing a good job of identifying BPA at positions of value. And they made a hard decision around trading away Tyreek Hill for assets. So you got to be able to make those hard decisions, hit in the draft, and have the high-end talent when you've got the quarterback and the coaching staff. And the Bengals can try to emulate that with coaching staff continuity and with Joe Burrow at quarterback. And then you got the playmaker on offense in Jamar Chase, and then you fill in the team around that, right? The thing I will say to the Bengals' credit is that their approach of not going for the top end in terms of paying guys, at least not on their own team, because they've just made Joe Burrow the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, or highest paid player in the NFL. When they sign guys like DJ Reader, when they sign guys like Trey Hendrickson, Chidobe Awuzie, Mike Hilton, that is their approach of going kind of not to the very top, but in the middle to top end, and they're finding really good value there. So obviously you'd like to see them continue that, but as the last year demonstrated, that's not always the easiest thing to do, and sometimes that approach will miss and lead to some investments in players that don't work out.
Sure. And I think when you look at their drafts, I think they have a lot of contributors in last year's draft and in the draft before. The instant impact element of it does matter.
Well, the high end, like the top end, you know what I mean?
Sure. But top end of what? Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice?
No, like Trent McDuffie, I think, is a stud. I think he's awesome.
And what the Bengals would say is they wouldn't have had a shot at that level of, because they were drafting so late. So
Sure.
What does that mean? No, but what does that mean? That means that they better get 18 right.
Well, and Creed Humphrey and
now,
Trey Smith too, because you could talk about the later picks that you mentioned.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
those, again, I'm sure the Bengals are kicking themselves for obvious reasons. But it's not like the Bengals have had awful drafts. Like they're not awful, but it's that combined with losing key pieces and maybe adding the wrong pieces in free agency last year, and then it quickly changes and feels like it's much crazier and they're much farther away. I don't think they're super far away, but they do have to get it right in some key areas. They have multiple weaknesses that they have to address, And a lot of those should be filled with upgrades from what they had. And we'll see if they can do that, whether that's instant impact draft, right? If Jerzon Newton is there at 18, I'm sure he can be plug and play better than what you had 3-tech in 2023. Instant impact. There are multiple guys like that. That's just one example. It doesn't have to be Brock Bowers. It's instantly your best tight end. So we'll see. But I think it's a mixture of free agency, finding the value, but then also, you're right, finding some high-end guys in the draft. And who knows, maybe Cam Taylor-Britt is that. And the injuries kind of got in the way of what would have been, this guy who would have made a Pro Bowl in year 2. But they need that, and we'll see if it happens.
I'm just saying there aren't very many positions on this team right now that would prevent me from drafting a player that I think has a higher ceiling in the first round. And that's why I'm saying, like, this BPA idea, like, let's really draft BPA for instant impact this year, not think too much about who's going to make the longest term impact in the future, not think about where do we have the most glaring need. That's why we
position value.
Yes and no, right? But largely no. Like, if you have a guy that can just be a stud football player, you get him, right? And you look at the Lions for those lessons. But interior defensive line, I think, going to be a big theme. Tight end going to be a big theme this offseason that we'll continue to talk about. And we'll have time to explore those topics. Time to get into the spreadsheet, James, and give some free agent tiers out. I've started the process, but we got it in there. It's locked and loaded, ready to go. And start to put together some potential offseason plans involving an approach to free agency and how that can set the Bengals up for the draft. That's some exercises that we can start to get into here on Locked On Bengals. We've got the Combine coming up as well, so still plenty of football to talk about, even though the 2023 season is on. The franchise tag dates start, that opens up pretty soon as well.
10 days.
10 days. We'll get to talk about those topics and more here on the Locked On Bengals podcast now that the 2023 season is wrapped. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.